We've got
I shouldn't be really, but
Councillor Jill Williams has sent apologies, hasn't she?
I've got substituted by Councillor Richard.
She's probably on her way. If you've got a substitute down
And substitute for Councillor Denman.
Diamond.
there.
It's a wine.
Well, it's only a minute to the bottom, yeah.
My computer says 1900.
Session happened.
Greenwich Mean Time.
So Councillor Skelton. That's all.
Councillor Wilson is going to be part of it.
Who?
Wilkes.
No substitute.
I didn't see it actually.
He coming to say wasn't coming in.
His apology.
Oh, sorry. Nobody's apologies.
Thank you, councillors, for attending this meeting of the Licensing and Public Protection Committee. The agenda has got 8 items. The first 3 are to do with specifically licensing, and it's agenda items 1, 2 and 3 we'll be looking at. But can I take, first of all, apologies? I have, and please correct me if I've got any of this wrong, apologies from Councillor Jill Williams, who is substituted by Councillor Richardson, who I understand is on the way. Councillor Diamond, with no substitute available. Apologies for Councillor Skelding, who is substituted by Councillor Hutchison. And I have apologies from Councillor David Allport, who attended to give his apologies. I also have Councillor Wilkes' apologies. And the last 2 I have no substitutes for. Is that right? Is that correct? Thank you. Agenda item 2 is the minutes of the previous meeting, which is on pages 3 to 8 of your agenda pack. Is everyone happy to take those as an accurate record, or does anyone want to make any amendments?
No, they're fine.
In fact, thank you very much. Minutes of the previous meeting approved. And agenda item 3 is the minutes of the licensing subcommittee meetings, and that's pages 9 to 10, quite short. Is everyone happy that they are a true record of that meeting? Yes. Yes. Thank you very much. Approved. So if we now move on to the next agenda items, they are to do with the Public Protection Committee meetings, and they're agenda items 4 to 8 of your pack. The first one, agenda item 4, asks for declarations of interest in relation to public protection matters. Are there any declarations from this committee? No? No declarations. Thank you. Agenda item 5 is the private hire and hackney carriage fees and charges, and that's on pages 11 to 16. Could I ask our officer, Matt Burton, please, to give us a report on that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. This report is in relation to private hire and hackney carriage fares, fees and charges. You'll remember just before Christmas we came to committee, as we do annually, for approval to go out to consultation, which we did so. This report is to bring the results of that consultation back and then ask that the fees are approved to go into the corporate set of fees and charges. It's the usual sort of background and issues that we've raised previously in terms of how it's become to be a Public Protection Committee function setting fees. Council have delegated it to the power to you. We followed the statutory consultation process, which is putting a notice in a paper and also on the public buildings for 28 days with a request for comments. We received 1 response, which you can see at 2.3. I've not replicated it as an appendix, but it was an email that just says fee is too higher, and that was all it said. We didn't receive any other responses whatsoever. So just in way of explanation, perhaps section 2.5, that's a table of proposed fees and charges. Column A is what the fee's for. Column B is what we currently charge. Column C is what we're asking you to approve. And column D has a percentage change in the fees. There are a couple that have what look like a large percentage, but it's the same that you saw back in September or October, sorry. The DBS fees are set externally from the council, so they're nothing to do with us anyway. They've just been placed there for information. The one of note, I guess, is the knowledge test and the failure to attend, which has gone down by 35% from £20 to 13. And as mentioned at previous committee, the reason for that is the original fee included the cost of buying the kit to administer the test, the tablets and the software that we use, which has now been paid for. So now it's really just the officer time of dealing with the applications and the tests themselves. And then the section which you didn't have last time, which is at 2.6, between committee and us going out for consultation, the DBS decided to publish a change in their fees, and the table at 2.6 breaks down as to what our enhanced DBS fee is for taxi drivers as required. Again, that's set externally from us, and the administrative charges are what our provided charge. We, as an authority, don't take any money from that. It's just to administer the cost of the DBS. So in terms of recommendation, we are asking for the committee to approve those taxi fees and charges to start on the 1st of April. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Do any of the councillors have any questions that they would like to ask about the report? Councillor Sweeney.
It's not a question, Madam Chair. It's just an observation, really. The fact that this council has said that the knowledge testings, because the stuff's all been set up, we don't need to charge as much as we did before. So we've reduced it to what it actually costs us, which I think is very honourable of the council. That it's not trying to rip our taxi drivers off. Thank you.
That's the only point I was going to raise. I think it's so good. It's probably the only bit of this legislation that the taxi drivers like, that there's been a reduction, but it does encourage them to take the test. Thank you. So if any more questions? So moving on, Matt. Agenda item 6, the taxi licensing policy guidelines.
Sorry, Chair. Just in terms of the recommendation.
Oh, sorry. I beg your pardon. Jumping the gun. So enthusiastic to march on. In terms of the recommendations, just repeating them. Trying to get back to the page. The recommendations are: the Public Protection Committee approves the proposed taxi and private hire fees for 2005-2006. Is everyone in favour?
Yeah.
Thank you. Carried. Can I march on now? Thank you very much. Marching on, agenda item 6, the taxi licensing policy guidelines. Matt, could you report on that, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Committee will remember that back in September we brought a report in relation to some suitability guidelines that were being consulted on by the Institute of Licensing, where officers made some recommendations and some comments in relation to that consultation. That document has now been published by the Institute of Licensing. That happened on the 13th of November. Within our current taxi licensing policy, we have Appendix J, which is our suitability guidelines, which is taken from the previous iteration of the Institute of Licensing's guidelines. What we are asking today is for approval to send a consultation to relevant stakeholders within the trade with a view to replacing Appendix J we have currently with the new version. I'm not going to seek to go through all the various amendments because there's lots of smaller ones, but I'll just highlight a couple just out of interest. the most relevant section for us is chapter 4, because that's the bit that we have as our suitability guidelines and that we'll be asking to be incorporated. A lot of the changes are additional sentences or wording to clarify the purpose or the meaning of certain sections, or for consistency. A couple which might be of interest are at section 4.37, which is offences that involve violence. It's been clarified that includes, again, violence against persons, property, animals, or the state. Because a comment that we made in terms of the consultation that terrorism and similar offences weren't included, that seems to cover that now. There's also been a new section at 4.49, which has added a new category of offences involving regulatory non-compliance. That's to do with convictions around sort of trading standards, food safety that aren't otherwise incorporated or included in the categories. So that now gives us a starting point for those types of offences that we occasionally see. There's an addition in there that if someone is on a barring list, that they will never be, or the starting point is they will never be granted a licence, which was always the starting point really anyway, but now it's clarified in writing as proposed. And then there's been a couple of extra points at 4.60, 4.62, which relate to what constitutes inappropriate behaviour on the part of an individual, and also that if a behaviour is considered to be predatory, then there's a time period where we would, in this instance, they would never be considered fit and proper for licensing, and that wasn't covered previously. So it's just adding sort of weight and clarity to the types of matters that can be considered and how we would deal with them should they arise. And the last one, finally, is there was an additional appendix added, Appendix 2, which is in the document attached as Appendix A. And what they've done is they've provided an example decision notice that authorities can use when making decisions to revoke or suspend or refuse a licence, which gives the explanation, the reasons for the decision, but then also makes it clear what the decision is, what the rights of appeal are, and so on and so on. Our own decision notices do that, but they've provided one, again, with a view to consistency. So recommendation, Chair, please, is for members to note the contents of the report and approve that we may consult with relevant stakeholders to replace that current appendix within the taxi guidelines, taxi policy, sorry. If there's any questions, happy to take them. Thank you.
Any questions from councillors on this matter, on this particular report? Councillor Williams.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just in generally, Matt, how does this compare? I know we're getting out of consultation. Compare with what we do now at this moment in time. There's a lot of change in there, which we'll see what the consultation does, whether good or not. But is it similar or whatever? Just in general terms.
For the most part, it's the same as it was before. Most of the changes that have been made have been to clarify points or to actually make it stronger than what it is now. And when I say strong, I don't mean that they've changed from maybe a 5-year period to a 7-year period or a 10-year period to never. It's added in bits that hadn't been considered previously. And what had happened then is we started sort of afresh on a case-by-case basis rather than having a starting point in writing. So what this has done is actually made it some of those, I'll say odd, unusual, one-off type things that we didn't see very often. It now gives, assuming we introduce it, it would give us that starting point that we had already, but for all intents and purposes, it's just clarified a lot of the points to make things clearer for us and for stakeholders when making those decisions.
Thanks.
Councillor Allport.
Leslie.
Oh, sorry.
I'm substituting.
Your voice isn't deep enough to be David off.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just sat down in.
You've been appointed.
But we'll take your comment anyway. Thank you.
Okay. On the one which is section 6.2, did you have many cases where licensees would be taken to court for predatory behaviour and then be relicensed after 10 years? I'm just out of interest. Thank you. Page 19.
Okay, 5.8, sorry.
It's section 6.4.62 and it was 4.58.
Okay, yes, thank you. That was just one of the ones I mentioned, wasn't it? We've not had any matters where we've had to consider what would be considered predatory behaviour.
Okay.
So for us, it's not something we've had to consider from starting afresh like that. We have had some more unusual matters, but what the benefit is of having it in now is if we were to encounter that sort of problem, we wouldn't, if we were to introduce it, we would have a starting point. Whereas before, our starting point would be we'd have to just start at a point of law and work our way sort of forwards with it.
I think that's quite a good change to that sentence, to be honest. Thank you.
I think with what's been going on in the news over the last 12 months, I think that's an excellent report and a point to highlight and question. Thank you very much for that. Anyone else got any questions particularly? I have a question, Matt. I'm not sure whether you can answer it or not. Obviously, this is approving that consultation takes place with the relevant stakeholders, and sometimes it's always said in earnest, but sometimes the take up is very little. Looking at historical data that's been given, what sort of take up is the norm for this sort of thing in the trade? As far as the consultation process. I mean, I'm thinking back to times when questionnaires were given out for various organisations and you'll get 17 out of 100 back, and then they start to change things based on the comments that 17, which is 17% of the whole, have made. There's a presumption that the 83% are then happy with it. So I was just wondering what the rate of consultation responses was expected.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll take it sort of in two parts. Generally, when we have consultations like this, we either get almost nothing or we get a very heavy response load. So the report that we had previously where we've gone out to fees and charges, which is an annual one and clearly affects every single person within the trade, with everyone having been notified it, we received one email out of around 600 licence holders who hold multiple licences, but around 600 either people or individuals or companies. But if you look at the last time we did the taxi policy, for example, but as a whole in 2019, we had a lot more licence holders at the time, but we had hundreds of responses. And whilst it's not always the case, as you've already highlighted, the depth and level of response sometimes reflects how much of an issue people see it as being. So it's not necessarily the people who don't respond are happy, but they don't have enough concern to make a representation or a comment. So we'll do the same thing that we've done with the fees and charges and that we did with the taxi policy, which is just closed, which obviously come to you at a future meeting. We'll send it off to all licence holders, everyone who's a relevant stakeholder, neighbouring local authorities, police, all people who might be involved in that. And I wouldn't like to guess how many, but I would anticipate we would get some from various groups who have got an interest in the matter. And then, of course, we'll bring it back to committee for approval and discussion.
And we'll see whether we have to be reactive or not.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you very much for that. Any other questions or comments at all, councillors? Thank you. So if we look at the recommendation, that committee note the contents of the report and approve that officers may consult with relevant stakeholders on replacing the current taxi licensing policy suitability guidelines with chapter 4 of the updated versions. Is everyone in favour? Thank you. Carried. Thank you, councillors. If we go to agenda item 7 now, and I haven't got the page reference numbers because I've got a huge report in between. And it's the tax conditionality consultation. Matt, could you give us a report on this?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Me again. Tax conditionality is a sort of concept that was brought into the licensing regime anyway in 2022. By way of background, what it means essentially is that regulatory authorities, such as ourselves, need to be satisfied that the people entering into that trade are registered correctly for tax, to make sure that they're not falling into the hidden economy, that being individuals and businesses who earn income but is hidden from HMRC, so tax isn't being correctly paid. You'll see in the background section that there have been numerous consultations in the past sort of 10 years from HMRC, and how much it costs the economy for those people and businesses who are in the hidden economy, some of which are deliberately hiding there and not paying taxes, but some deliberately, not deliberately, and just unaware of their sort of obligations. As I said, in April 2022, tax conditionality was introduced for taxi drivers, operators of private hire vehicles, and also scrap metal dealers, which are all ones that the licensing team within the council deal with. And what that meant was every time we carry out a check, so every time someone makes a renewal application, if they're in that trade, they provide us with a check code through the government gateway service. We then use that code and it'll flag up a nice green box that says, yes, they're registered, brilliant, crack on. Or it'll be a red flag and say they're not appropriately registered. We've not actually had any of those, but that's what would happen. And if that was the case, then we are not allowed to process that application. For people who are new to the trade, who have never been in it before, obviously they may not be registered at that point. We have to give them the advice and say, this is what you need to do, these are your obligations, and by the time we check you next time, you must have done those things. And that seems to have been really well received nationally. It's quite an easy system to use, and we've certainly not really considered or had any issues with that. So the point of the report is that HMRC are looking to expand that to other sectors. The 3 sectors that they've mentioned specifically are waste, animal welfare, and taxi and private hire vehicles. In relation to waste, we've not really offered any response because it's not something, or the areas within waste that they're looking at aren't Borough District Council level regimes. It's more the Environment Agency, so we've sort of stopped short of anything other than saying it's a good idea. Animal welfare, which animal licences, as you'll know, are dealt with by the local authority. We've suggested that it would be a good idea that it's introduced for those regimes as well. There's no reason why it shouldn't be. They're people who are earning money off the back of having an authorisation to carry out an activity. So there seems to be no good reason why people shouldn't be correctly registered and registered for tax and having those obligations. And the taxi ones, it always seemed a bit strange that they hadn't included those people who had vehicle licenses but weren't drivers and operators. And this would sort of close the loop, so everyone in the trade would then have that obligation placed upon them. The consultation does close tomorrow, so we still have time. At Appendix A, you'll see the officer response to those questions. I won't go through all of them. Generally speaking, well, not even generally speaking, we as officers think it's a great idea, and it's very beneficial for society as a whole to get people into the tax system, paying tax, whilst benefiting, earning money from those licenses and registrations and things that they have to come to us to get permission to do. Within the consultation, they HMRC, also ask a number of more general questions and for questions, and ask for other activities that could also be included, just I think as an information seeking exercise. They ask about pedicabs in London. Clearly we have no sort of control over, but there has recently been a Pedicabs Act introduced, which when there are regulations will regulate those activities within London which have been unregulated forever. So that will bring those people into that scope as well. And then in Appendix A, in terms of the questions, what else could be included? We have suggested some other areas which they might like to consider, such as food business registrations, special treatment registrations, which are sort of the non-surgical amendments as tattooing and acupuncture, those sorts of things, which are getting quite a lot of press coverage at the moment. Hairdressing, car washes, nail bars. There's going to be a regime brought in by the Health Act for some of that non-surgical work when sort of parliamentary time allows for that. There's no reason why it couldn't apply to various licensing act licenses as well. Street trading permits and consents, which we don't really deal with, but could be something for the local authority to consider. So generally speaking, we're very, very supportive of the idea of it. It seems to be almost a no-brainer because all it is those people who are registered for tax, they provide us with the code, we check it, and we carry on. For those authorities that do have problems, it's on a statutory footing that if they're not correctly registered for tax, then you can't process their application. It makes it very straightforward. We've not had those problems, but it seems a very straightforward and sensible proposition. So our recommendation, Chair, is for members to note the contents of the report and agree that the Officer proposed consultation, which is Appendix A, be sent to the government prior to the closing date, so before the end of tomorrow. Yes, I'm happy to take any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. It's not so much a question as a comment, really. I just want to say, as somebody that, as a very new councillor, seconded a motion for the council to go for a fair tax status, this really is welcome because I'm sure that we'd all agree that the hidden economy, it's quite frightening to read that 6.2 billion was missing in tax revenue, and anything we can do to address that is really welcome. And I'd like to congratulate the officers for their work on this and also for their comments in the consultation, which would lead to an extension of other businesses that, would be included in this. I do have one question, and it may be beyond your remit, Matt. I'm thinking about freelance people, self-employed people that may work, for instance, as consultants for the council. Would there be this ability to check their tax status in the same way?
Not under this regime. Tax conditionality is for where people require a license or an authorization to do some for the job that they want to undertake. So in that remit, no. I suspect it may form part of an employment style check if it's someone that's being brought in from an agency or consultancy, or at least if they're part of an agency or consultancy, they'll have done that check before they're employed. I don't know exactly how that works, though, I'm afraid.
Thank you for that, and thank you for bringing the report to us.
Yeah, it's an excellent report. Thank you. Thank you for raising that, Councillor Brown. As someone...
Sorry, you've got another one there.
Yeah.
Again, I thought that was these points are really kind of comprehensive and easy to understand. The only thing I don't know is what is a pedicab? Just out of interest.
I've taken one of these.
Have you ever been in London, seen a bike with a little shed on the back, and been scurried around at incredible rates with loud music?
With great respect, it's a rickshaw with a bicycle. Shed on the back.
I'm sure it's all very safe and above board.
Yeah.
But that's what they are. And as I said, they're all over the place. But that's what they are. So
It's a good point to raise. If it's any help, one of the things I found out by talking to a taxi driver in London not that long ago, because I've taken pedicabs from the theatre back to the hotel, and it's great fun, is not only are they not licensed, because they're not licensed, they're not insured. And that means if it tips up and you're hurt or something happens to drive over you, you are being hit by an uninsured person.
Which is why the driver for London now is is why the Act has been brought into place, because it's been highlighted for such a long time that it is such an unregulated activity that it needs some sort of regulation. So the Act came out this year, last year now, sorry, just awaiting some regulations, which obviously won't affect us, but that will put in place a licensing regime for those drivers and riders and safety implications and everything else. So we await that.
Thanks for that, Matt. And I can't let it go. I have to congratulate the pun. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Hutchison.
Yeah, just like to say, Matt, I was really pleased to read section 2.6 in relation to animal welfare. I think that sits very well with our animal welfare charter that we put through full council not that long ago. And it's good to see that dog breeding, animal boarding establishments and pet selling is now coming into this area. And I welcome this. Yeah.
Just in relation to that, in terms of the consultation, they specifically mentioned dog breeding, animal boarding and pet selling. We've suggested that any animal activity which has a license and or a registration falls into that remit. So again, wider, if you need a license to do an activity and you're making an income from it, you should be included in that, and that's our view.
I think section 2.6 has put a huge smile on Councillor Adcock's face.
That's right.
Any other comments or questions, councillors? So if we go back to the recommendations, just to clarify, the recommendations of this agenda item are that the committee note the contents of the report and agree that the officer proposed consultation response be sent to government prior to the closing date, which is tomorrow. Is everyone in favour? Thank you, carried. Well, the only other point to deal with is any other business. Does anyone have any other business that they've notified? I've had no notification prior to the meeting. Thank you very much, councillors, for attending. I designate this meeting closed at 19:33, and thank you all.